Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Rob, and welcome to another episode of Phrasing. Today, as always, I'm beginning my sketch by establishing my perspective lines in the horizon, and I'm demarcating areas of interest on the page based on the rule of thirds, which is essentially a third of the way from the left and right of the page, and a third of the way from the top and bottom. I'm sketching out very simple guidelines, and this time I'm taking a slightly different approach than I have before. I wanted to spend a little less time painting over and erasing these guidelines, so I've actually created a separate layer on which I'm doing the actual line art. As a result, it's coming out a little bit cleaner, and I should be able to pump this out a little bit faster. The only drawback being that I'll actually lose some of the stray marks and lines that make the painting feel, in my opinion, more like an actual gritty work of art, something that was produced by human hands, you know? This is one of the most absurd things that I've had to paint so far. So I wanted to just keep it a little clean, a bit more abstracted, to make it feel almost unreal. Cartoony, I guess, would be a good way to describe it. So having established my basic sketch and satisfied with the overall composition, I'm blocking in my basic colors. Now, instead of doing a normal color wash, I'm actually just doing alla prima paint for the background. I'm following the same ideas that I had in the previous video. Things that are further in the background have a lower spread in the contrast range, and they're slightly closer to the environment color, which is a light blue. And things closer to the foreground are actually, they have a wider contrast range and are slightly darker, tending toward the deeper blues, almost black. Now this man in the foreground, as you can see, his skin tone is the darkest possible color that it will be, because I'm going to be painting lighter values in. It's always easier to paint light than it is to try and paint shadows. So typically, if you're going to use a fill color, you'll want to fill in with the darkest colors that you possibly can for the area that you're painting. For example, like on the bill of his hat, it's made out of this wool, white cotton, but because it's going to be in a nighttime scene lit by the ambient light of the scene, it'll be this sort of very darkened, very desaturated blue, as opposed to a pure white. The parts that are lit by the moon and the ambient light, however, will actually have something closer to the natural color of the material. And you'll see this in a few minutes. Now, right now, I'm trying to select a good gradient to underlight these characters. At first I thought perhaps I would use maybe some kind of orange, something that looks like a campfire, but instead I tended for this slightly green tint. I'm not really sure what kind of lighting that is. I'm not sure what that light source would be, but I found that the green fit well with the flesh tones of the shirtless man, and it played nicely with the fur color of the bear, so I decided to go with that. So now here I'm adding in the rim lighting, the brightest parts, outlining these characters in silhouettes. See, by having this rim lighting in general looks fairly good in most scenes, but in this case especially, because it's a nighttime scene and we've got characters in silhouette, by having this rim lighting, I'm actually outlining these characters and making it easier for you to at a glance see exactly what's happening in the scene. Now I'm just adding smaller details. The bear's fur proved to be a bit of a challenge. You can't treat that like you would flesh. The fur itself catches light differently, so you actually have to drill down and really do individual hairs catching light to give it that feel of fur. Same thing with shadows. There's never this consistent area of shadow. There's always gradients, there's always roughness. And you can simulate that using a specialized brush, but here, as you can see, I'm trying to just demonstrate that you can do it no matter what kind of brush you're using. So I just use my standard brush, as I do for 90% of the things that I've painted on this channel. but I changed the size so that they're fairly small, and then I just painted out rough changes in color and value to sort of indicate the gradual uneven nature of the fur. Like if you look on the belly, you can see that there's bits of shadow even in the parts where it's getting brighter from the underlight. And that's all just from having this one brush and just keeping it at a fairly reasonable size and painting in at differing angles and differing pressures roughly how the fur would lay across its flesh. Now going back to the man, much easier to paint, smooth skin. So here I just try to catch the secondary bounce sources of light, trying to make sure that I keep the shadow consistent. He's being lit primarily by the moonlight, which is over to the right. So I want to make sure that that's the brightest portion. And then the underlight, well, the source of the underlight is somewhere below, so his face is actually being caught in the shadow of his body. So you really don't want to paint that too much with the underlight color. And now fleshing out the boxing glove a bit, fleshing out a little bit of his beard, making sure that I give it the same sort of treatment I did with the bear's fur. Simple, small strokes of a tiny brush to add shadow and a little bit of highlight in an uneven manner. And now here I'm using a splatter brush to sort of add a little visual punch. Yeah, see what I did there? To the image.